I understand you had the chance to meet Pope John Paul II. What was it like to meet a living saint? I did. I met Pope John Paul II twice, one time in 1995 and another time in 2001. And I can share a couple memories. These were very, very meaningful to me. 1995, I was almost 26 years old, and I was on a pilgrimage in Rome. I had been invited by my local bishop, and I got to go with him on this pilgrimage to Rome, and he promised part of the pilgrimage would be a private audience with John Paul II, which actually happened. We had a private audience. There were maybe a little under 100 people there. John Paul II comes in, and he walks in the room, and I had seen him from a distance at other events, but there he was, like 20 feet away from me, and he gives an official address. And then he walks around to greet the pilgrims. And I had kind of shimmied up to the front, and he came to me. I was a student at the John Paul II Institute at the time. I was also a musician. A lot of people don't know this about me. I was pursuing a music career before I pursued a theology career, and I had put out an album of music, and the album was called Pilgrim. So I was introduced to him as a student at his institute. He looked at me and he said the word, student. And then I gave him a copy of my album. He read it and said, Pilgrim. These two words, for all these years, have stayed with me. Two words spoken directly to me by a living saint.
Blessed by Pope John Paul II.
And they're words very meaningful to my heart. I'll always be a student in following the Lord. I'll always be a learner, and I'll always be a pilgrim heading to my heavenly homeland, the home of the Father. Fast forward 6 years. My career as a Catholic theologian had already taken off at this point. I was in Rome giving lectures, and I had had some contacts from people I knew in the church that I was able to write to Monsignor Jewish, who was John Paul II's longtime secretary. And he was the gatekeeper of the exclusive invitation to the Pope's private Mass each morning, right? Which accommodated maybe 25 or 30 people. And you wait for the call. You give your hotel information where you're staying in Rome, and you wait the night before for the call. And I was there in Rome for 3 or 4 days, and the final day was December 8th. December 8th is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and I was convinced that John Paul II was going to be giving a public Mass on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. So I thought December 7th, the morning of December 7th, would be my final chance to get invited to the private Mass. So the night of December 6th, I did not get the call. And I hadn't gotten it the night before either when I was in Rome. And I was like, oh, gosh, darn it. I was really hoping to get the call from not a cardinal at the time, but Monsignor Jewish, to go to the private Mass. Well, on the night of December 7th, to my surprise, I got the call. The call! The call! I was invited. He wasn't doing a public Mass on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. It was a private Mass in his private papal chapel. I was excited out of my gourd that I was going to be, one of 25 or 30 people to sit in this little chapel. And I was off on the corner, right in the front row. We get ushered into the chapel while he's praying initially. And we had 5-7 minutes maybe of just quiet prayer with the Holy Father sitting there. And then he goes off and he vests and he comes and he says the Mass. And of course, you're in the presence of the Holy Father.
Best day ever.
And we didn't know it at the time, although we all believed it to be the case, in the presence of a living saint. And then afterwards, the Swiss Guard come in, and you have another 5 minutes or so to pray with the Holy Father. He comes out and he sits in his chair, and he's praying before the Blessed Sacrament at the end of Mass. And then we get ushered out to go into John Paul II's private library, where we all have a chance to greet him. Now, I don't know where I got this nerve, but the Swiss Guard ushers everybody out, and I have the nerve to stay. The Holy Father's right there, right? So I go up right behind the Holy Father, and I extend my hand over his shoulder, and I just praise God for the gift of this Pope in my life. And then I'm starting to get nervous because I'm the only guy in this private chapel with the Holy Father, and I don't think the Holy Father knows I'm right behind him, but I'm imagining if the Swiss Guard comes in and sees me, that I didn't leave when I was supposed to leave, that I'd get kicked out and I wouldn't have a chance to go to the library and actually meet him. I was there for maybe, 30 seconds, which seems like an eternity, but I just prayed over him. I thanked the Lord for the gift of this Pope. I wanted to kiss him on the cheek, but I didn't. And then I kind of scurried out and went into the library with the other pilgrims. And I awaited my turn among the 25 or 30 people there. And when I went up to greet the Holy Father, everybody else had been kind of formal and given him a handshake, and I couldn't resist. I just reached out and gave him a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. And I said, "Thank you, Holy Father, thank you." And I was introduced to him as a visiting professor at the John Paul II Institute, because I was a visiting professor at the branch of the Institute in Melbourne, the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family. So that's how I was introduced. And so I think he thought I was Australian, but then if he understands different English accents, he would have known when I spoke to him that I was an American. Nonetheless, I said, "Holy Father, thank you so much for the gift of your theology of the body. I have studied it extensively. It has changed my life, and I've given my life to sharing your theology of the body around the world." And then I handed him a copy of my first book, which had just been published, I think, the year before. Good News About Sex and Marriage. It used to be known as the Purple Book, because you'll see in the photo there, it was purple. It's since had a new cover, but nonetheless, I gave him a copy of my purple book, Good News About Sex and Marriage. And to be honest, I was hoping for a little bit more of an exchange in the work I was doing. He certainly took some interest in the work that I was doing, but what really caught his attention, much more than the work I was doing spreading his teaching, was when I showed him a little photograph I had in my wallet of my wife and, at the time, my 2 sons. We have 5 children now, but in 2001 we only had 2 sons. I showed him a picture of my 2 sons and my wife. He immediately got this very wide smile, took much more interest in my family than in my work or my book. He turned to his secretary and asked for extra rosaries, 3 extra rosaries to give my wife and my 2 children. He said, family, family.
There's always room for family.
So the 3 words John Paul II spoke directly to me personally: student, pilgrim, family. And I left that meeting with the Holy Father with a challenge issued by the Pope himself directly to my heart. What do I consider more important, my work or my family, right? This is a struggle every man goes through. Obviously, we know the right answer, right? I know my work is more important than my family. No, I know my family is more important than my work. Obviously, that's the right answer. But it was a challenge to me to look at my heart and say, why was I more interested in telling him about my work than I was about my family? Just a lesson to always look at our hearts and say, where are our priorities? What are we putting first in our lives? And it was only a few years later, so that was 2001. It was in 2005 that I was working closely with Mikhail Waldstein on the new edition, the new language translation of the Theology of the Body. I am not a language scholar by any stretch. Mikhail Waldstein is, but he was checking his translation with me, and we had a number of exchanges of emails, and I was just offering my suggestions, and it was a lovely, fruitful experience to work that closely with Mikhail on the new translation of the Theology of the Body. But during those months of working with Mikhail, he shared with me that he had found a manuscript, the original handwritten manuscript of John Paul II's Theology of the Body, and that there was a date in the upper right-hand corner that told us, obviously, when John Paul II started writing his Theology of the Body. The date was December 8th, 1974, Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And he devoted the entire Theology of the Body to the Blessed Mother. It said December 8th, 1974, and underneath that it said, Tota Pulchra es Maria. You are all beautiful, Mary. So wow, what a gift from heaven. What a gift from the Blessed Mother herself to allow me to have that encounter with St. John Paul II on December 8th, Feast of the Immaculate Conception. It would have been the 25th anniversary of the day he started writing the Theology of the Body. That's when I had that life-changing encounter with John Paul II. I'll never forget it.